Folks, I just thought, I don't know what time it is. I looked at my watch, it's 5:01, so I apologize. We usually try to start on time. So it is 5:01. My name is Larry Linthicum. I'm our superintendent. I appreciate your coming out here. It's a little better weather than it was two nights ago. A little chillier, a little brisker, more brisk. A couple nights ago. So it was chilly, but we appreciate you coming out here as we work through the process here to gather input. Our folks, we're going to go through a PowerPoint. We're going to ask for your feedback. We're going to share some information. If you were, anybody here or at LC on Tuesday night? Okay, a few of you. We collected some data. We're going to review some of that. Some things we've done since then and plans that as far as we gather, it's a work in progress, folks. We have Lori Massman, here's a board member. Thank you, Lori. We have Lorelei Swartz. Here's a board member. We have Steve Bruce, board member. Any other board members? I don't see it this time. So thank you guys for being here as we work through this process. So start in time. The reason why we're here, we have three pillars: learning, partnership, and stewardship. And those three things, everything we do ties back to those three things. And if we can look at something that would potentially increase learning, the partnership aspect as we ask for feedback and your input, and then three, the stewardship, potentially save up to $500,000, we should be exploring that. Whatever we decide, as we're always trying to look what can we do to improve, to become a premier school district in the state of Missouri. So that's why we're here. We had one 2 nights ago, as I mentioned earlier, and the reason being at 6 p.m. to just kind of have more options to accommodate folks in their work times and so forth. So again, thank you guys for being here, and we'll go on from here. So the learning, partnership, stewardship that I just touched on. Let's go ahead and go to the next screen. This is our current bell schedules. Dr. Schindorf, I'll let him touch on this. This is basically our current bells, and as we look at this, you can have a better idea of where are we and why some of the challenges goes along with it.
Okay, so what you have here in front of you, these are our secondary school start times. You can see that they are pretty consistent, anywhere from 7:50 to 8 o'clock for our secondary schools. And then, here's where some of the concerns begin. This is the bell schedule for our elementary schools. You'll notice that they're everywhere from 8 to 9 o'clock. So on the in Callaway County, our North and Callaway Hills are both 8 o'clock schools. We then have two of our more far extremes, Pioneer Trail, Moore Heights, are at 8:15. We have 4 of them starting at 8:30. We have 3 of them starting at 9 o'clock, and then early childhood special education is at 8:50. And so you can see that there's a lot of inconsistencies in the times that we have for our elementary schools, and it creates issues for us. Oftentimes what we want to do is get, for example, get all of our second grade teachers in the same room to do professional development and have conversations about second grade. It's pretty difficult when they are literally an hour's difference from the time that they start and they stop. And so it creates more than just busing issues, it also creates professional development issues for our staff. So we currently function on a tiered system of busing, and here's why we do that. When we have a bus that leaves, for example, leaves the bus barn and runs a route for TJ, goes out, picks up the TJ kiddos, drops them off at TJ, and then goes back to the bus barn, that for 1 year costs us $44,000. That covers the bus, the drivers, all the expenses that the bus company, that's what we pay the bus company for a year's use for that bus to do that and go back to the bus barn. If at the same time we have a bus that leaves the bus barn and runs a Bel Air route and comes back to the bus barn, of course we pay another $44,000. All right, so what we do is we try to use a tiered system to use that same bus that would do a double route, which means that it would go out from the bus barn, pick up the TJ kids, drop them off, and instead of going back to the bus barn, go out and pick up the Bel Air students and drop them off and then go to the bus barn. Instead of us paying the $44,000 twice at a cost of $88,000, we save about $40,000 because the second route, when they run the Bel Air, instead of being $44,000, it costs us $4,500. And the reason for that is because the bus company, when they run that first route for TJ, they've covered all their costs. The cost of the bus, which is about $120,000, the driver, the maintenance fees, the rent, and all those costs are taken care of in that first route. So when they run that second route for us, all they're going to charge us is for some driver's salary, for a little bit of wear and tear on the bus. So we save a considerable amount of money if we can get a route that will double as opposed to just being a single route. So currently right now, our average secondary route is about 43 minutes, and our average elementary route is somewhere between 20 to 25 minutes. So there's a big difference between the elementary and the secondary routes.
Can you leave that on there? So I might even touch on this example is example bus 2. So I'm driving bus 2 next Monday. Okay, I got my CDL to experience driving the buses because it's one of the top 5 complaints that I hear about is our buses. So bus 2, I've ridden on that bus, just rode the back seat too. I had a new experience when I did that, but I will drive it next Monday. It's 43 minutes when we come here to TJ and we deliver those middle school kids and take them home. Get here about 2:45, 10 till 3. Jolene, what time does the bell ring here? 2:50, 2:55? What time do you get out of school here? 2:52. Okay, so those kids get on the bus, we take them home, and then from there, 43 minutes later, we are able to go to Bel Air and then pick those kids up, and it's a 21-minute route. So that's an example of, instead of having 2 different buses paying 2 different drivers, we're able to tier that, and we're able to do that because TJ gets out of school at 2:52 and Bel Air gets out of school at 4 o'clock. So that's why we can do that and save. As you can see, the double route, each route averages 24,000, and the single route averages 44,000. So you can see the savings at $20,000 a route savings when you double tier if you're able to do that. Okay, so let's go to the next one. So we have, Brian's touched on there, 26 individual routes. Some of those primarily in Callaway County because of the, all their schools start at 8 o'clock, their elementary schools, north in Callaway Hills. And our high school and TJ start at 7:50 or 8 o'clock, so they all have to do individual routes. So they go pick up Callaway Hills kids and they take them to Callaway Hills and they go back to the bus mark. A north route goes and picks up north kids, takes them there and goes back to the bus route. In addition, we have buses that go pick up the middle school and high school kids in Callaway County on a different single route, picks them up and then takes them to the appropriate Lewis and Clark or the high school. So that's an example of the single routes. The double routes, we can do that. We can be more efficient when we have a gap, an hour ideally gap between the schools. The inefficiencies, I put this on here, added this as a square peg into a round hole, because honestly, we're trying with some of our routes. Go back real quick to the slide if you could with the start times. So for example, Morrill Heights starts at 8:15. So I drove bus 20, which is Morrill Heights, and trying to do a double tiered route. We have buses there that have K through 12 kids on there. And we'd like to just have elementary on there or just secondary on there. There are some more possible student behavior discipline issues when you have a K-12, and we're not able to do that. And it's just a lot more challenging with schools that start at 8:15 or 8:30 because we cannot do the double tiered system. So what we're trying to do and that we're exploring, bottom line in a nutshell is, can we have all of our elementary schools at one time and our secondary schools at another time, whether early and late or late or early, whichever we decide, which would allow us to spend basically $24,000 a route versus $44,000 a route by having more tiered systems. Okay, so we can go back there. Brian, I'll let you go on to the next one here.
Okay, so we've had some ask, why don't we just all start at the same time? In order to do that, we would have to use all single routes. And so what we've done is run a projection. If we were to allow every school to start at the time that they want and everybody got their own single route, so we didn't have to double up, we didn't have to worry about a bus getting to another school, that would require another 37 buses, and that would be an additional $1.5 million to our budget if we allowed everybody to have a single route. We don't have $1.5 million, and we believe that if we did, we could probably find some other areas that probably we would need that more than in this area. The other issue is that we currently have a shortage of bus drivers, and we believe that if we were to go to all single routes, we would have a very difficult time finding an additional 37 drivers to do that. So issues with our current schedule. So in order for it to run efficiently, for it to work well, we need about an hour's gap between the first school that they run for and the second school that they run for. You notice from those times that we don't have very many schools that give us an hour between the secondary schools and the elementary schools. So what happens is we have a lot of times where the buses are showing up, they're not showing up at the right time. So they're showing up late, kids are running late to eat breakfast, or they're showing up late at the end of the day. And we have cases where our staff are staying after 15, 20 minutes and supervising kids after the school day is over because buses are not there in order to pick them up. So why don't we tier more? So here are our issues. So we can't tier the Callaway counties, as Dr. Lithman just said, because they both start at 8 o'clock, and that's when our secondary school starts, so you can't tier them because there's no gap there. We can't tier Pioneer Trail and Morrow Heights because of their time at 8:15. We just don't have enough time. 15 minutes is not enough time to drop off kids and run the route. So what we do there is, unfortunately, I believe it's Pioneer Trail. Pioneer Trail, we have buses that are K-8, which means we have kindergartners and middle schoolers on the same bus. And then at Morrow Heights, we actually have a K-12 bus. We have two of them where kindergartners and seniors ride on the same bus. And as you can imagine, that is not an optimal thing. Certainly something we don't like. But we do that in order to try to do the tiered system. So we need to have a short secondary route. When we do have short secondary routes with those 27, we then can run a tiered system. And we do that for east, south, north, and west, but we can tell you from experience that we don't do it very well. We don't have very good service. These are the schools that experience buses showing up late in the morning or late in the afternoon. So we do it, we just don't do it really well. So the ones that we actually have the opportunity to do that are the 9 o'clock ones, and so Cedar Hill, Lawson, and Bel Air, and the early childhood, we actually do fairly good with our tiered system because we have an hour gap between secondary and those 4 sites. Okay, so here's what we know. We're going to open up another high school. If you haven't heard, Capital City is going to open up in August, and what we know is it's going to require a change in our busing. And so projections are showing that we're going to need 5 to 8 more buses in order to accommodate the bringing Capital City online. Currently, right now, we're efficient because we just have the one high school, so all buses and all students come to that one. But when we have 2 high schools and 2 different drop sites, it's going to require about 5 to 8 more Tier 1 routes, which is going to be a cost increase somewhere around $300,000 in order for us to do that. If we do nothing else, just add the routes, take care of Capital City, will be about $300,000 in additional cost. The issue with that is that we're going to spend somewhere around $300,000 more dollars, and we're going to continue to have the poor service that we are currently getting. And I want to say this about the service. When it comes to, so why doesn't the bus company just fix that? We believe that it's really us that's creating the problem because we are not giving for a student the hour gap that they need. If we provided them the gap, we believe they could provide a better service. And so we're the ones who are saying, we don't have the hour gap, you just have to make it work within 45 minutes or 30 minutes. So they're doing the best they can, but we're asking them to do something that's really not possible. So an additional $300,000 if we do nothing. The goal would be that all elementary buildings would start at the same time and all secondary buildings would start at the same time, having an hour gap between those two, an hour difference between the start times. We asked for a student to run projections, so where's the cost savings if elementary went first or if secondary went first? Where do we save money? And the projections came back that there is no savings either way. It costs the same regardless of who starts first. The only savings would be in fuel, and that is, for example, in the Callaway County, it's more cost efficient fuel-wise if you run the elementary route, drop off right there at North and Callaway, and then run the secondary route and then come into town, as opposed to run the secondary route out there in the country, come into town, drop off secondary, go back out, pick up the elementary, drop off, and then come back to the bus barn. So the fuel savings is not huge when you're looking at a $4.5 million budget, but it is a cost difference if the elementaries were to go first. So if we were to get the hour gap and we could tier more routes, we can save $160,000 compared to spending $300,000 more. And so there's a cost difference somewhere in the neighborhood of almost $500,000 compared to do nothing or make a change and get an hour gap. We also believe that getting the hour gap then is going to not just save us money, but it's also going to give us a service that we're actually wanting for our students. So these are the options we're looking at. Option one is for the all elementary and the early childhood, for the preschool to begin first. And then option two is just to flip that, let the secondary schools start first and elementaries go second. The time frames, there's a little bit of wiggle room there, but we had to plug in a time, so we're looking at somewhere around 7:50 to 2:50 for one of those groups, and then somewhere around the 8:50 to 4 o'clock time frame. Those, again, those are flexible a little bit, but somewhere between those time frames. So, in the past, if you've been around here a while, you know that this is a conversation that's been taking place for some time, and some changes have not come about as a result. And in the past, there's been a lot of conversations about the cost savings and the poor service that we're getting. But there's also some research that says making the change has an impact on our students, mostly on our secondary students. That research comes from the American Academy of Pediatrics, and they talk a lot about the fact that our secondary students really need to be attending or starting school later than what most of them currently do. And so there's a lot of research about that. So there was a big study in the Seattle Public Schools about this very thing. They made a change to their secondary schools and had them start going later, and they did studies to find out what was the impact. And what they found is by doing that, the students were more attentive, they were alert, there was research about their, not just their attendance, but also their academics, their performance. And so there was a lot of research done through that, but also the American Pediatrics, right now, that is one of their #1 goals is asking that, would like to see that our secondary schools start at least past 8:30. Anything prior to 8:30 in the research was an issue. And really what the research comes down to, and I think we have Dr. Krause here, correct? You were with us a couple nights ago, and she actually shared some information. I don't claim to know half as much as you do, but what the research basically comes down to is that we all function within a sleep cycle, the circadian rhythm, and it's a 24-hour cycle. And what happens is when students get to a certain age, getting closer around puberty, that cycle changes. And maybe you've noticed this with your own children, is that they no longer want to go to bed as early, and they want to sleep in later. Well, it's not just because they're being stubborn, it's because the cycle is changing within them, and it's more difficult for them to fall asleep. We all fall asleep because the melatonin in our body gets released sooner, but it doesn't happen in our teenagers. And so there really is research behind, they really are struggling to fall asleep as early as what we want them to, which means they want to sleep in later, and you all probably noticed that.
Let's maybe have her even share.
Would you like to share anything,
Would you
Dr.
mind
Krause?
sharing? You're the expert.
I'm Jennifer Krause, I'm a pediatrician, and in 2014, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommended that all middle and high schools start no later than 8:30 based on research. And yes, those circadian rhythms do shift around puberty. So people have asked the question, well, what happens if schools start later for these students? And studies show that when we start those secondary schools later, those students actually do get more sleep. And the benefit of that is decreased tardies, decreased absenteeism, increased academic performance. There was one study that showed decreased rates of depression symptoms when the school was shifted to starting later. One study showed decreased car crashes among 17 and 18-year-olds after moving the school start time. So even after the 2014 report came out, there have been additional studies like the Seattle one showing that we should really consider later start times for our secondary students.
Thank you very much for sharing. We are going to all 18 of our schools and our elementary schools that we have been to. The anecdotal evidence from our elementary teachers, especially those schools that start at 9 o'clock, that share that 2 o'clock, 1:30, 2 o'clock, 2:30, that their younger kids especially, that they're spent, that their effectiveness of the learning that takes place in the latter part of the day goes downhill significantly. So that is something that as we touch on as far as with the evidence with our younger kids, as they get up earlier and the last part of the day, that if they were to start later versus starting earlier, the comparison with that. So of the two options that we're looking at, one is elementary schools going early is the option one that Brian had shared earlier, and secondary going later. So there's pros and cons for both of these. This is my 4th year in the district. We have not seriously considered this change. Jason Hoffman, who's not with us tonight, he's been in the district for some time. There's been 2 other times that our school district has looked at a changing of start time. So somebody's being needed. So as we look at that, some of this evidence, maybe you remember from the past, some pros and cons, and we're going to ask tonight for your input on some additional, or if you think we're off the mark, as we look at these. So Brian and Dr. Krause touched on the research for the later start times. The evidence I touched on with our elementary teachers. These are pros if the elementaries went first, that we just covered. Morning bus stops later due to shorter routes with neighborhood elementary schools. So, as we touched on, our average elementary routes is in the 20-25s versus our secondary routes at 40 to 45 or 46, I think was the average. And so if elementary schools were starting earlier, the morning bus stops later due to shorter routes. So if they get on the bus, we had someone on Tuesday night that said their child gets on the bus at 6:05, okay? Well, we think that if it was, they could be later than that, potentially, if our start time now, this was, I guess that was Callaway Hills or North, so that wouldn't change. So they get up early with that. But our other schools because we have 2 schools that start at 8, that's North and Callaway Hills. The rest of our schools that would be moving earlier, that would be a change, shorter route for them, so they wouldn't have to get on the bus as early. We have 5,400 kids, I believe, the ride a bus. That was one of the questions. We went a 2-hour late start today. And yesterday we didn't have school because of the wind chill advisory. And we have 340 kids on average that walk to school each day. So unfortunately, some of our students do not dress accordingly. And so that's one of the reasons why for our student safety, just a little offshoot of that. Additional second tiered route allows for fewer students on board buses and shorter routes, as you can see, but just as far as that there be fewer students on there, we think that would be a positive. That is no different than a smaller class sizes would be a positive in our schools. High school drivers not driving during the morning rush hour, and I believe, I don't know if it was the Seattle report, that they had fewer accidents with teen drivers not fighting the rush hour traffic. I had some messages today and asked if I would pay the deductible on a high school student who had a fender bender this morning, and want to know if I was going to pay the deductible since we had school today, even though it was a 2-hour late start. So there would be a reduction. That's something the research has indicated on that. High school schedules are more flexible, allowing for voluntary 0-hour courses. They are more flexible than the elementary schedules. As many of our secondary students as they drive, looking at the secondary level with the scheduling traditional versus block, we have some 0 hours now, and we anticipate having more of those moving forward, so that is a pro for the elementary starting earlier. So the cons, this I believe, I was not in the district, was the #1 negative on elementary school starting earlier, where the older siblings will not be at home to provide childcare for their younger siblings when they got home from school. And so we understand that's real. There was a lot of discussion Tuesday night, and we're actually going to be doing a survey of all of our daycares in the community and asking them, including the Y and the Boys and Girls Club, and asking what's working, what's not, what do they anticipate, what do they charge, for us to have a better understanding. So that's kind of the takeaway from Tuesday night with that. But we understand that's a real concern, and we'll need to be able to address that. Students who work may not be available to work as early in the afternoon. We understand there are many students that work in the community as far as high school students. There are school to work programs that I don't think we take as advantage as much as we possibly could or should. We think the flexibility with 0 hours would allow our students, if they take a 0 hour, to still be finished at 3 o'clock versus 4 o'clock with the flexibility of 0 hours. But we know that's a real concern, not only as they make money for themselves, but they also contribute for their household money as well. Changes the bell times for all students in the district except Callaway County elementary students. So we understand change is pain. Most folks don't like change. And so with having elementary schools go early, with North and Callaway Hills being the only two that goes early, it changes the times for the rest of our schools. And we recognize change is pain. So that is a con with that. After school activities go later in the evening. So if they're going till 4 o'clock, the practices will start later. We do believe we are starting a conference that will have the 3 Columbia schools of Hickman, Rockbridge, and Battle, and then JC Capital City, Helias, and Sedalia. So our travel distance will not be as far. There will still be times that they are traveling a long ways. We recognize that, but we do believe it will be reduced. In the 3 Columbia high schools, they start at 8:50 and they go until 4 o'clock. So it would align with the 3 Columbia schools if our secondary schools started at 8:50 as well, as far as with start time. So we recognize that. We will have more gymnasiums. We are adding a gymnasium at JC. There will be an additional gymnasium in addition to the one in the school at Capital City. So there will be more gyms, but as we all know, there's always a request for a lot of gym space. So we recognize that, but we are hoping that there will not be, as far as having an early and late practice, we do anticipate possibly having some early practices with school. If the secondary went later, that some of the coaches might choose to have practice before school, because they do that now when they start at 8. So if they started at 9, we would anticipate that happening as well. Last student dropped off in the evening is later. As we touched on, it's a 46-minute average secondary route. And so if they went until 4 o'clock, they would be getting home later as well. So potentially up until 5 o'clock if school gets out at 4. If they're a route that goes an hour, it would be 5 o'clock. So we understand that later start time would have them getting home later, and that is a con of that. The last con here is change for sending schools to Nichols Career Center. We have sending schools. We're the host school of the neighboring schools that send their students for a career education at Nichols Career Center. We think we have this addressed. We have morning schools. JC schools are in the afternoon, and then in the mornings, the surrounding sending schools. And we think we can keep that at 8 o'clock, even if we went with the secondary starting later. And their time frame, expected work time, would just be different than our other teachers. So if they are 7:30 to 3:30, that could remain that way. If they wanted to then teach the last hour, or we could pay them a stipend, and some that have expressed interest in doing that, but their expected work time would just be shifted like a 0 hour, 0 through 6 versus 1 through 7, for example. So that's the elementary schools. Brian, I'll let you touch on the secondary starting earlier. For the most part, the pros and cons on one are just shifted, but there are a few other wrinkles with this.
Okay, the pros obviously is that the older siblings would be home, so it addresses the primary issue is childcare. There's going to be fewer schedules changed because the secondaries would stay primarily where they're at. We would have to just shuffle and adjust some of the elementary, so we would have less change. After school activities would finish earlier. The cons, it goes against the research that is what is best for our secondary students. The early morning bus stops are going to be longer routes because of the secondary buildings, because it takes longer for them. They have to get on earlier, so the con is that we have kids on the bus earlier in the morning. Older siblings then would not be at home to assist the elementary students to get ready for school. So if the secondaries went first, obviously they would be gone off to school, and the elementaries then in the morning, parents would have the issue. So it's just the flip side. Whether you have an issue in the morning, you have an issue in the afternoon in terms of taking care of your elementary students.
This was basically a recap. If I don't understand these were Brenda's notes here and Shelby's notes, so thank you. But basically a recap from Tuesday night. Then I just kind of want to share what we've done with that information. So concerns regarding child care, that's a big deal. We understand that. We're not going to say, hey, our job is to educate kids from open the doors until they close and you're on your own. We're not saying that. We do have a responsibility to work with families because we have working families, and we recognize that. So the daycares, the Y, the Boys and Girls Club, we're looking at other options. As I touched on earlier, we're going to survey all of our daycares and ask them, because we've had some parents that have said, their daycares have said, we won't accommodate that. Well, somebody sitting beside them would say, I feel assured that the daycares will adjust accordingly if it is their livelihood and their business. So we want to work with them, and so we're going to have engaging conversations with those folks. So here were some things that folks had shared, as we're going to ask tonight for your input as well. Parents looking for additional low-cost childcare options. You know, what are those options to consider? Because it's different if they have elementary, middle school, secondary students and the start times, that it could be something different and having to work through that. So considering what those options might be, and we want to help with that process, and we think with our survey, and then from that we hope to involve some of them as a focus group to ask for their input to see what can we do to accommodate our families. Concern regarding middle school students getting on bus after the parents have left for work in the morning. So if the middle school students are starting at 8:50 versus 7:50 and they leave for work at 7:30, do they trust that they'll get on the bus? Or just the safety wise, or some different parts of that, and those are real, so we'll need to work through that. One positive of whatever, if we look at the secondary going later, is we have many conversations. I did today with somebody at Columbia Public Schools with their 3 high schools that they moved to the 8:50 start about 4 years ago, and of conversations of what worked, what didn't, what advice would they give us as they worked through the process. They said it was a painful process, but they said if they were to do it again, or considered, would you do it if you had the same option? They said they would, but it was kind of painful getting through that. So hopefully we can learn from some of their mistakes if we choose to go that route. Questions regarding timing on the early out days that are used for PD. How will this impact the after-school program? So, as Brian touched on earlier, we are not able to, of any of our elementary schools, have a professional development for all the 4th grade teachers, let's say, or the K through 2 to look at our reading as our #1 goal on how we could do that. Well, how does that align with the after-school programs, the Boys and Girls Club, the YMCA, as far as with after-school programs? So those were concerns that we'll need to be able to address as well. Potential to decrease time students are on the bus. That was a positive. If they could be on the bus less time with shorter routes, we think that would be a positive. Elementary starting earlier would help with little ones becoming tired, unable to focus by mid-afternoon. I touched on that earlier. The bus service concerns, regardless of when school's starting in. Student behavior-wise, we talked about that. And then concern that secondary students might not have enough time for homework and activities if they get out later in the day. So you could say on one element, if school starts an hour later, are they going to stay up an hour later? Some will. We recognize that, but I think the research would say overall that they will get more sleep. And I don't know about you, but the teenagers in my house, it's one of my top things that irritates me about getting to bed. So maybe you guys don't have that battle, or maybe I could take some parenting pointers from you on that. So next steps. So the survey, I touched on that, our child care folks, and asked them what's working, what's not, what do you see as we consider these options. They can bring a lot of knowledge to us, and we need to consider this. So this was something that came from Tuesday night, that we really need to have a better understanding of what we do with that. Meet with the Y and the Boys and Girls Club, determine their capacity and what it costs exactly. The board gave us the go-ahead, the thumbs up to explore these options. So Jason presented to the board in November. Brian, I think, presented the research in December. We had it as an agenda item here in January. We will here in February, as well as a first reading with asking for approval in March. So when they are agenda items, you can come address the board and give your views. We will have more of these opportunities. We have a coffee with Larry in the morning. Would like to invite all of you. 7 a.m. at the Miller Center, the first Friday of each month. And we'll be discussing this as well. We want to give our community and our parents plenty of opportunities to share any of their thoughts. We've been going to all of our buildings, asking for feedback. We have about 3 or 4 schools left. We were supposed to be at Lawson yesterday and TJ yesterday. I believe after school, we have to reschedule those because of, we didn't have school yesterday. Feedback collected. Focus group with secondary students. Our secondary students can give us a lot of valuable input. I was getting a lot of input last night on calling school off today, but you take that for what it's worth, but they can't give us, asking for their opinion. So we're going to, Gary's going to facilitate with our secondary students as far as focus groups. And then the recommendation in February with the second reading. We do that on our school calendar. We have it as an agenda item as a first reading, and then we come back to the next month as a second reading and so forth. So the same type of lens from that. Okay, so here's what we would like to do. Each of your tables should have a post-it notes here. So you've got different colors. The colors do not matter. Here's what we would like you to do. We would like you to put on your post-it note what you see as a question that we maybe haven't answered. If it's an elephant in the room that needs to be answered or addressed, please put it on this, and we will go through each one of the post-it notes here at the end. They'll put a written response, and they'll email those to you tomorrow. If you did sign in, if we had a sign-in sheet, I don't know if everybody signed that or not, we hope you did. But we'll address each one of your questions here on a post-it. So, and they'll collect it. We don't have an easel. So if you would take a few minutes, a question that you think, hey, you didn't answer my question, put it on a post-it. We'll go through every single one of them, and then we'll give a written response to this group as well to each one of those questions. And when you get your question written on here, just hold your hand up, and Shelby and Brenda will collect those. So if you need 1 minute or if you need 6 minutes, I'll kind of walk around and have an idea. Please write down a question or concern that maybe we've missed, or pros and cons that you think we have missed, and then we'll address those. That's the first part. The second part, we're going to ask you to put pros and cons that you see, and then we'll have each table report out if you feel comfortable doing so. So take a few minutes, put on a post-it, something you'd like us to address, and again, I appreciate you being here. they do that, then we'll do the other part of where we're asking for your input. So, reminder, we will come back and answer every single post-it note. So here's what we would like you to do. At your table, you have a sheet that has the pros and cons that were the same as were from the PowerPoint. There should then also be a blank, as in elementary starting earlier, what are we missing, pros and cons, and maybe you put it on your post-it note. And on the back side, it has secondary starting earlier, what are we missing, pros and cons. So what we would like you to do is at your table, and if you're singles, if you wouldn't mind kind of congregating, if you'd rather not, that's fine too. Just take a few minutes, we'll put a timer on at 5 minutes, and then if you're willing, we'll have you report out with the mic. If you'd rather not, we can take your list and share it with folks, and just kind of the pros and cons. So the blank sheet, we'd like each table to fill out if we're missing something from your lens, because we want to know what you think. So we'll do that, and then after that, we'll report out, and then we'll go through each of the Post-its, and then we'll be done. So last time we were a little over an hour. If you need to leave, we want this to be a come and go if you need to. We understand life happens. So again, thank you guys for being here. We'll put 5 minutes. Can we bring the timer?
I can put 5 minutes on right now.
They're going to put a 5-minute timer for starters, and basically, and you may be done in one, you may be done now. But just here on what your idea is, if we're missing anything on this, and then we'll have you share out at your table. So, we'll put 5 minutes. If you're done before then, we won't even need to do it. But we'll go ahead and get started, and then we'll touch base again with you. You got it on there? Absolutely. Appreciate it. Thank you. Try to get that like. Okay, our 5 minutes, raise your hand if you need some more time. So everybody's good? Okay, all right. Hopefully I didn't waste your last 3 minutes or last 4.5 minutes. If you are willing, if your table, if you'd have a representative or a spokesperson from each table, hey, here's what we had, pros, cons, and they, as you share those, our fast typers will type those and you'll see them on the, if we could maybe increase the size there.
Gary,
Well, I can, but I was.
and then Gary, take us to pros and cons.
We want to make sure that we, take from what you said, make sure that it reflects what you were trying to portray, because we could misinterpret and we want to make sure that we're consistent there. So, can you guys read that? Lori, can you read that?
I'm looking for you right now.
She's working for me. Okay, I think we're fine right there. That's perfect. Okay, anybody here? Sarah, are you the spokesperson or somebody here? Greg?
I don't know that we came up with any new ideas. We just kind of reiterated ones that I think were kind of our biggest concerns. Okay, so as far as secondary starting earlier, we are most focused on the extra academic time that kids on sports teams would be missing if they left earlier, missed more class in order to get to faraway events and competitions. And then the thought that there would be less time in the evenings for the kids that work and do extracurricular activities to do homework. We don't realistically see them getting up in the morning and doing homework. That's just, not something we consider that would be realistic. A con as far as elementary, starting earlier, being at elementary buildings, most of the Y cares are booked up. And so if they ended so much earlier and those kids, the high school kids are still in school, we're just worried about where are they gonna go, and that's, I think, a very big, real issue. And I know the families have had to deal with that in the morning, so I know that's already a known. We're dealing with it in the afternoon, we're talking about how many more hours of that. And then we're also curious about what the secondary focus groups are gonna look like. Like, we're gonna take, what kind of, a variety of students that will be pulled for doing that. Different family backgrounds and situations and such. Yes, Brenda, obviously?
I do know.
Okay, good.
I do know what we're doing with that, because we have asked each of we're gonna do a focus group with 10 TJ students, 10 LC students, 20 Simonson students, 2 different groups, 10 each. And we want a group of sophomores from the high school and a group of juniors from the high school. We've specifically asked them to pull kids who work after school, kids who can't do anything after school because they have to ride the bus and that's just their situation in life. Kids who are active in several things. We've asked them to give us ethnic diversity, we've asked them to give us income diversity, and I've asked them to give us grade diversity. So I'm hopeful, now I have not seen the list, but the principals that I've spoken to have been very committed and understand that we are trying to get a true cross-section. Ryan and I are leading those focus groups, and the reason we want to do a focus group instead of doing a survey with kiddos is because I can actually ask you, well, tell me what you mean when you say that, so I can truly understand what you're thinking and what you're talking about. So we're optimistic that we're going to get a cross-section of kiddos. So if you got another demographic idea, we're up for it too.
Thank you, Brenda.
I guess one of my concerns for the focus group is making sure that we get a hold of the single family homes who the high schoolers are watching the kids after school. I know that's a really big thing. A lot of my students walk to Fort Ford and pick up their sibling and walk home. So I want to make sure that the kids are getting a stay.
I'll make sure, I don't remember that specifically being on my list, but I'll make sure that we add it, if it's not.
Anything else here?
Ours kind of goes along with that, if you don't mind it. It's along with what you had said about the concern with the elementary starting earlier. Families that don't spend money on daycare now will have to start paying for daycare. And daycare, as you said, it depends on how many children you have in elementary school, the cost. So that was one. And I guess while I have the money.
Sure.
For the high school students where I teach, for activity students and for athletes, they, they will get home later, and the high school kids have way more homework than elementary kids. And that's a big concern for me because they're already tired and they get home late, and no, they're not gonna get up earlier to do their homework. I think that was the only thing. Yes.
It's time for the family, elementary kids. They have to spend time at school. They are sent for an aftercare. Right? That they get time with dad and mom.
Less family time? Okay.
That's from what I read in the newspaper. I have no at Grant, I don't live here. I was just wondering, there are multiple schools within our region or like schools that have more than one high school. And I was wondering what survey has been conducted on the start times and the end times of those schools that have more than one high school, so we can see there if our start and end time, they've already addressed this, is relevant and relates to what's happening in other school districts, so we can base that on the real world for those school districts. And so I would like to get, if you've not done that, and my question is, have you actually seen what start and end times are for other like school districts that would match up to ours?
Answer her again for us at Columbia. They've started now their secondary schools, they moved to all of them starting at 8:50, Battle, Hickman, and Rockbridge. I didn't see their survey. I know we've had conversations with them of this is what worked, this is what's not, here were concerns as they work through it. Because at the end of the day, the number one thing is just change. And change is pain because they're used to doing things. We need to make sure embedded through the different parts to it. So that is real. Did you guys have anything? Okay, good. Anything here you want to share? Okay. How about right here? You're the lucky one.
So we thought about the younger siblings attending later activities. They said they are well aware of that.
Which, excuse me, is this of the elementary starting early?
Yes.
Okay. Con of elementary starting early?
So if my younger child is having a bigger activity, but then my younger child has to conduct it. And then implementing or putting a 0 hour puts kids back into morning traffic, takes it like, takes away the less sleep. I understand it's not going to be all kids, but implementing that and putting that is going against the second.
Did you get that? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, for secondary starting earlier, pros, one thing was the Nichols career classes. Right now, when all the school buses come in, it's kind of organized chaos, so I imagine starting those, the rural kids from the other districts, like my own district, later, or earlier, that's gonna alleviate a lot of traffic and potential issues. I think that would be a big, help. All the if the morning Nichols classes are starting at 8, and the Josephine ones are starting in the afternoon. One of the cons we were discussing is traffic issues with students driving to 2 locations. There's a forecast for how that might look and how that might impact, especially with a different start time. And then with elementary starting earlier, one of the, it's not really a pro or con, just a thought, was could you provide like a homework help time to keep students supervised after? That's what my district does for after students. Some of the cons that we discussed were elementary students getting on the bus super early and just kind of concerns about safety, making sure they're providing that work. The second one is that family time might decrease in the evening because parents' schedules might not be able to change. Kids are getting home later, so there'd be less time to do family activities together. Is it three, or do you want to continue to improve it? I think I got what you meant, but I just double check.
Yes, so more on the family time. I came from my child, Battlefield Elementary. We moved here a couple of years ago because he had to be out there on the bus stop. I believe that and we lived like 15 minutes from the school, but his bus time was at like 6:30, 6:40. So he has to get on the bus pretty early. And then, of course, we worked until 5, and we didn't get to him till probably like around 5:30. So when they got out of school, he was just there at the school, sitting for hours. And I guess he was so tired at home just from sitting at school all day. He spent all day at school already, then had to go into an after school program. And I know they try to make it fun and they try to do the thing, but at that point of time, you know, he's sitting there and he's still at school. And by the time we got to him, ate dinner and did homework, you know, and of course he had to go to bed so early because he had to get up so early. We barely had, I don't even think 2 hours of family time. Versus now, he lost it. So school doesn't start till 9. And when my wife's schedule is set up, I'm able to drop them off and she's able to pick them up. We don't have any after school costs. And we just spend a lot more time with the family and we do a lot more activities and we go to bed a little later. Now there's a lot of studies out there that I've read that says how elementary school kids more sleep than older kids. And if their times are running earlier, if their bedtimes are a lot earlier, on top of getting home a lot. So just for me, it's just gonna close that gap of family time, which is what happened. Yeah, and of course, we talked about the social economic status of a lot of people. You know, you hear all these studies and you don't know if they control for social economic status in those studies, but you know, people who, very middle class type of studies sometimes that don't take into account those lower social economic status, people who, again, have to work for their family, students have to work to provide for their families, or parents who work 2 jobs and have it set up right now where it works for them and having to change. So, and again, I'm not saying it should be a student's job to work for his family or her family, but we can change their life and what they have to do. We just have to take it into account.
Appreciate you sharing that. Were you able to, so would you recommend, if we were asking as far as keeping the loss that starts at 9, as far as keeping the elementaries late, that option?
It definitely works for my family.
Your situation?
Just talk about other people's family, what works for their family. But for my family, just speaking on myself, it really works. And we just spend so much more time together as a family versus what I imagine, than what we had before when we lived in.
Okay, I appreciate you sharing that. Appreciate you sharing. Okay, we kind of have a group together here, so we're going to go through each of the Post-its, and if they're in categories, and Brian and I will attempt your help here as far as with answering each of these. They will be typing the answers. If we don't know, we'll say we don't know, and we'll get the answer to you by tomorrow with the email address that you provided to us. Is that up here? Okay, so questions from attendees. So your questions should be up here. If you don't see it when we get there, or if they transcribed it incorrectly from what the intent of what you put on the post-it, please let us know. So if we're attending middle school later, what do we plan on doing with kids whose parents drop them off early? For example, this morning with a 2-hour late start, we had kids dropped off at 9 a.m. and parents left. So middle school wise, so the question at our middle school, so instead of starting at 7:55 or 7:52, is that our normal start time? 7:55, and then opening up at 9:55 as far as start time. And it should have been opened up at 9:20 or 9:25, is that correct? Okay, so the doors should have, I don't know what the situation here, the doors should have been,
Technically, right now, the bill, I don't know if I'm answering the right question, but technically, the building opens at 7:30, but we always open the doors 7:20, 7:15, so we have kids standing out there.
okay.
I
So,
would assume we would do the same thing again.
okay, so the question this morning, so they dropped off at 9 o'clock, parents left, and kids were outside when we weren't opening the building. So the question was, if middle school started at 8:50, and we would open the doors at 8:20, what would we do if they dropped their kids off at 8 o'clock and just leave them there? Is that the question? Basically? I know, and I don't know if we do here at Thomas Jefferson, we do at one of our middle schools, we pay a staff member. I know we do at some of our elementary schools, we pay a staff member. Do we here? Okay, so we would do the same thing. Now, I'm not sure this morning or night, it is always different when it's a 2-hour late, but as a general rule, we would have somebody here to supervise them, and then we pay them. So I anticipate that we would continue doing that. Is that fair? Yes?
So you preferred people being here and paying them to be here early, and Nichols having a 0-hour teachers in high school, you have to pay them as well. So does that offset the savings that you're gonna get from changing bus routes? I mean, we're talking about saving $500,000, but is it going to go to paying teachers to work extended hours?
So basically if we're doing 0-hour or extended hours, would it offset some of that $500,000 savings? Obviously it would. We don't know how many, to know exactly how many courses we would be having and how much daycare is needed to how many staff members. We right now pay $15,000, I think Jason told us today, $15,000 a year total that we pay our staff outside of just to provide before school or after school in our 18 buildings. So would I anticipate that increasing? Somewhat I do. Close to the 500, I would really hope not, but yes, it obviously would have an impact on that, so good point. Okay, Brian, you want to do the next one here? I can let the little alternate. I'll just take the easy one.
Where does the timing for middle school fall into this plan as far as the start and end time? So depending on option 1 or option 2, the middle schools would fall either somewhere right close to 7:50 or 8:50, so either 8 or 9 o'clock start, depending on whether it was option 1 or option 2.
So if we keep the start time scheduled the same as the high schools, do we have enough money in our budget to service the second high school? That was included, and I believe Frank could confirm, we asked First Student to run. If we kept everything exactly like it is, we will need additional 5 to 8 routes, and that's where we have that additional 300 to 350,000. If we do nothing, just with the additional routes we'll need for Capital City High School. Okay, the 500,000 was then, if we did a tiered system to where all elementary and all secondaries at the same time, regardless of which one is first, we could save approximately 160,000. So saving 160, paying out 3 to 350, difference there is a net of plus $500,000. So that was figured in there, whoever's question was on that. Was there one up there above? No, I think we're good. You want to go to the next one, Brian?
Is there any support for JCPS employees who will no longer be able to accommodate pickup, drop-off, and will need daycare? So currently, right now, the answer is no. There were a lot of conversations took place after Tuesday's session. We had some folks, some employees that stayed after it. This was a big topic that we discussed. And our response is our goal would be to design a program that we could help support that. We don't know what that would look like, so we're not making any promises, but along with paying, we currently pay staff members to be there early to supervise kids. We believe we could create kind of a similar program where staff members would be willing for a stipend to supervise staff children. The question would be how many, because obviously we would want to pay a $1,000 stipend for someone who's watching one child, so it would come down to how many staff children in that building, what the needs are. We're willing to look at that, we're willing to design a program to support that, but until we decide whether we are early or late start, we won't go down that road until we have more information.
So the next question, what's your deciding factor for which schools start at which time? Our current start times has evolved over the last 25 years, is what I have found out. You may have your own opinion. Our elementary schools used to be close to starting at the same time, and a school would say, we need to go to 8:15 because of reasons A, B, and C, and they may be valid reasons, so they went to 8:15. And then 2 years later, another school, I need to go here to 8:30, and as a result, over 25 years, that's why they are across the board from 8 to 9 o'clock. So that decision has been made over time. If you're asking me, what's your deciding factor for which school start at which time? The two options are just trying to look at all elementaries at the same, all secondaries at the same, and the options 1 and 2 are either one early and the other one late, or flip as far as vice versa. So there wouldn't be well, Cedar Hill gets 9 o'clock, so they get preference, versus a school that's 8 o'clock. They would all be the same, as far as all elementary, all secondary.
I wrote that question.
Yes, okay.
So I guess my concern, sort of, you're taking all this feedback, you have your pros and cons. What will make you say that high school should start later and elementary should start earlier, or that elementary should start earlier?
Between the two options, deciding factor, so weighing the pros and cons that you guys are giving us, that we have developed, that we have here on the list, that you think we're maybe missing the boat. How does it apply to our three? The learning, the stewardship, the partnership, and then we take a recommendation based on those 3 pillars and make a recommendation to the board that they could say yay or say nay, but basically just trying to weigh the pros and cons. So no decision has been made on that. It's just trying to weigh what would be the best scenario if we did make a change.
I will say that I'm all for elementary being on schedule and secondary being on schedule. I
Yes.
totally understand that. I guess my concern is how do you decide who starts it, like which group starts it?
Are there more pluses or more minuses? I mean, I don't mean to make it that simple, but you're truly trying to weigh the pros and cons on that when most folks all have an opinion on that.
Okay, is the PowerPoint available to view again? Yes, it's not currently up, but once this session is through this evening, we currently have on our website, you can access the presentations that have been given to the Board of Education. Those are available. After this evening, hopefully by tomorrow morning, we will have this presentation up for review on our website.
So how does starting earlier at elementary kids help kids who are tired later in the day? Won't they be tired late in the day? Won't they be tired after the same 6 hours of school? Yes, I think the research and have determined that at a younger age, they're used to getting up earlier. And so we do know that there's some kids they may keep after school and they're doing activities, but as a general rule for the largest population of our students, elementary kids and the research on the developmental stages, that at the elementary kids, they get up earlier anyway. So after 6 hours, then they're able to go home earlier, an hour earlier, if they move from 9 o'clock to 8 o'clock. Even though we do recognize some kids may be at a daycare after school and they're still staying. We recognize that, but the biggest chunk of kids, as far as with the times, we think it would address that.
And we currently, right now, have situations where students are dropped off early in the morning. So if you're a 9 o'clock school, we have some elementary students, very young students, being dropped off very early in the morning, who are at the school an hour to over an hour's time before school even starts. And so their day is incredibly long if you're going to go until 4 o'clock. So if you're one of those elementary, if you're a kindergartner, you're being dropped off currently right now at 8 o'clock, you spend an hour before the school even starts. Then you go into school and you're there till 4 o'clock, and it's really a challenge for those kiddos, and we have those scenarios currently. Where are we? If elementary school starts late, the child will get up earlier, go to school all day, and then have to spend additional time in and after school program. The younger child spends more time away from home because they cannot stay home alone. Older kids, time away from home will not change. And again, this scenario is dependent upon your situation. We know this. We hear from families who say, if you were to have the elementaries go first and second later, you're going to create childcare issues for me. We also heard from families that say, if you make that change, you're going to help our childcare situation because now our secondary are going to be there to help us out. So we have heard from both sides, so it depends on your situation.
So extracurricular concerns, how will later end times impact clubs, drama, and other activities? according to the Columbia Public Schools, that they have more participation now in their co-curricular, extracurricular activities than they did before. One of our goals here is that all of our students participate in something outside of math, science, history, and English class. Find something they're passionate about, whether that is in chess club, whether it's in the flags, or in music, or in art club, or football, the auto body program, Skills USA, you name it, finding something. And they found that with the later times, that because the students, times that it increased as far as participation. So we think that will, that would apply here. And I'll just tie this in with the surveying teachers. But we're going to every single building and we're asking them pros, cons, what do you think, including our teachers that are the sponsors and the coaches for all of the activities, the extracurricular and co-curricular, and we're asking them, how will this work? What are we missing? What's the pros? What's the cons on that? So we're meeting with all of our staff. We still have 3 or 4 buildings left, but we will have been to all 18 buildings and asked them, hey, what's your thoughts on this? Weigh the pros and cons.
Individual families have spent more money every month. Gary has some of it covered up, but it sounds like it's the additional cost. The expense could double or triple with the number of kids in elementary. We understand that, but I'll go back to, we have heard from both sides that said, for our situation, you're going to double or triple the cost that we have because of our situation, and some have come back and said, you're going to eliminate our cost because of, again, it comes down to your unique situation. We understand that it's a problem. It is probably the biggest hurdle that we have to overcome. It's the hurdle that we've tried to overcome in the past. So we don't have all the answers, depending on your situation. We just want you to hear tonight that our plan is to work with as many of the child care providers and services that are available, and then to look at what we can do on our side in terms of our staffing and providing stipends for the folks to help us out. We're committed to helping with that program. We just don't have all the answers because all of the situations are unique.
Could you give a mock schedule of buses if the starting times changed? I've already made my schedule and like to have a heads up if those change. I'm sure we could get Frank Underwood over our transportation. They ran the scenarios per student to determine the cost savings and the number of routes. And I would anticipate that we could have not to the science, but a ballpark idea of what we think that would look like. And would that be fair to say? Okay, and is that something we could possibly get in written format where then we could possibly put on the website, do we think? Not tomorrow, but within the next week or so? Because I'm sure they've already ran those scenarios of what it would look like when we determine those costs. So I think we could get something for that. Okay, we will do that. So thank you for whoever made that comment or question.
I feel like we're doing a good job at TJ offering after-school music programs and other activities and clubs that help students discover their talents and things they enjoy. I feel if secondary schools are starting later, is this the same question? Yes, so the staff would now want to stay to facilitate these activities. That's very possible. That's not something we have the answer to, whether or not they will or they won't. We will tell you this, that we've gone to nearly every building and we're giving the staff opportunity to give us input. That's not something that any staff members have said at this point, but we're giving them the opportunity to tell us that.
Would this give more collaboration time between middle school and high school for vertical alignment? Changing the schedule won't, because right now they are for the most part the same. They are the 750 at the middle school and the secondary level. Would we like more collaboration? Yes, regardless of whether we change the schedule or not. There needs to be more collaboration as far as providing of time. That comes down to how are we prioritizing that. So I don't think the schedule will increase that, but it does need to be a priority, whatever the schedule is. I think would be a safe assumption. Is that safe to say, Brian, from your lens?
I think there's supposed to be studies have shown that younger kids need more sleep than older kids. Younger kids already go to bed early. Now they will have to go to bed earlier while spending less time at home. I've not seen research that says the elementary students need more sleep than the secondary students. So if that's the research you have, I'd be more than happy to look at that. We'll apply it to our discussion. The research that we've looked at indicates not about the amount of time, but rather the timing in which kids are falling asleep and waking up. There's a lot of research that talks about that, not as much about the, but Dr. Crouch, you want to speak to that?
I would say that some elementary students would need more sleep than secondary students. Also, to keep in mind, I think all of our students aren't getting enough sleep. Secondary students need 8 to 10 hours, elementary students probably more than that.
Thank you. Not to make light of it, but I don't think I'm getting enough sleep either, so.
What came to my mind was all of our students need more sleep, regardless of the age group. General comments, so what about light schools? When do they start and end? Have we looked at others? That's I touched on with Columbia as far as with the secondary, those schools?
That's everything, Larry. Nothing started.
Oh, we're back to that, okay.
It's more than just Columbia, because Columbia is not a good comparison. If they had many high school, they had many elementary school, it would seem like we would have comparison of numbers and like numbers. Hopefully that the traffic, that the area that we travel. But to me, we do like to compare ourselves to Columbia. Now we're using Columbia in this comparison for the time. I would like to see the research, look at other school districts, the Blue Springs and others, because I'm not sure start time and end time makes academic achievement better. And so if we're doing all of this and getting kids more sleep, we should then be able to set up, should be a correlation with their achievement. It seems like to me Columbia is not the good example. When I was in school board, we didn't want to have Columbia as an example. Now we're using it. Columbia is not a Jefferson City. We're more like other school districts. And I'd like to see the research to say what their start and end time and what are the programs they provide to families to support the different time schedules. So I would hope that would be a part of more research, since we're looking at research around how much sleep time we need. Because maybe those school districts, kids don't sleep and they don't get the same amount of sleep, but they also do well. So I just hope to get more research, because Columbia to me is not a perfect example.
Right.
It's just a totally different school district.
Right. It is different. They have 3 high schools. We have 2. And they would be in the conference, as I touched on earlier, with the 3 Columbia schools, our 2 schools, Helias and Sedalia, as far as our conference here that I touched on there earlier. So we do need to look at all of that, of what's working and what's not, and what we can learn from that. So, anything else of topics there? Okay, it is 6:25, so it was a little longer than I anticipated. Be willing to stay as long as we need to. We will stay after here for other comments and questions. The next steps here, I touched on the coffee with Larry, other avenues as far as an agenda item to discuss at our board meetings. As we look at this and weigh the pros and cons, we'll finish with the other schools, so we're at all 18 of our schools, and weighing the pros and cons, and we'll stay around here for any other comments, and I sure appreciate your guys' time. Anything else I need to touch on? Okay, thank you guys, and have a great night.